Welcome to Pixel Theater, everyone. My name is Nick Noel, and I am your host. And unlike most of the time, I'm joined not by one person, not by two people, but by three amazing people. I will let them introduce themselves in 1 second, but first I want to let you know what this show is about. If you're a new person, who knows? Maybe you've stumbled across us. Maybe you're in the distant future and you're an archivist looking through what the world was like in the time of 2021. What were people up to during this weird and tumulent time? Turbulent? Neither of those are right. I'm just going to move on, though. And apparently it was the same stuff they've always been up to, talking about stuff with people that they're interested in, I guess. So, Pixel Theater, it is a podcast. It is a YouTube series. It is a air freshener for your car at times if you like that new podcast smell. And today I am joined, I will go in order counterclockwise of how I see it. We'll start with producer Aaron. Now
Hello.
Host Aaron.
Now host Aaron. You might have noticed that Ron is not here today. Ron is doing big boy job stuff and we all miss him. So I am Aaron. I'm usually in the background typing funny jokes to both Ron and Nick. So if you ever have heard them just kind of laugh at something, it was me. I'm the funny one. But hello.
Next on the docket, we have Aaron's friend, Ali. Am I doing that right? Or
Yep, that's right.
Thank you. Okay, good. Who are you? What's your deal?
Hello, everyone. Like you said, I'm friends with Aaron. I am a software developer. Want to be a game designer someday. Who knows? That's a pipe dream. And yeah, I just like Castlevania.
It's literally the one requirement to being here.
Yeah.
And so all your other stuff is just icing on the cake. And then finally, we are joined by Dr. Vanessa Haddad.
Hey, I'm Vanessa, and I'm a professor and department chair of general studies at SUNY Erie Community College North Campus, and my work revolves around video games and trying to basically make life better and education better and more accessible, more fun. And I've been dabbling into gaming and literary and psychoanalytic theory lately. I've also dabbled into some app development stuff, and I just like a little bit of everything. So
that's awesome. I always enjoy when the guests are vastly more qualified to be on this show than I am. And in this case, all three of you are, so that's great. So let's move into our first segment, and we're going to go into the lobby and just kind of talk about whatever we feel like.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
So, anybody have anything they feel like sharing? Any movies you've seen, books you've watched? Read, some people call it.
Man, I wish I'd read books. I need to. I bought so many books and I just have not cracked open a single one. It's one of those things where you think you have time, and then when you do have time, you don't do the thing. Mm-hmm. Typical ADHD.
There it is. So I have similarly had a problem with reading recently, but I've solved that sort of by reading comics instead. I think I've talked about this before. So I finished Swamp Thing recently, which is a much more emotionally devastating experience than you would think it would be, because it's about the ruminations of loneliness and disconnect and how you reconcile with the world's perception of you given and your own perception of yourself, which isn't what people would think Swamp Thing's about, but it's totally what Swamp Thing's about. And then I started reading Swamp Thing so I could read Hellblazer, because I'm a completist. So I I had to read the first thing that John Constantine was in. So I've been reading that, and it's not as good. So that's been a disappointment.
Oh,
But oh well.
no.
Anybody have anything else they feel like sharing?
I started reading a book yesterday called Ideology and Political Life. I think it's like probably some very staple political science kind of book. I found it randomly at a thrift store like 10 years ago, and it's been on my to-do shelf for like a long time because it's always like, oh, I'll do that later. Oh, I'll do that later. A very ADHD kind of thing, right? And it's like, oh, I read the intro. I guess I forgot about it now. What am I doing next?
I have it's not exactly a similar thing, but like I saw like something about Bloom's taxonomy on the internet, right? And like that's something I deal with a lot with, and I realized like I'd only like heard about it like secondhand. So then I bought the whole Bloom's taxonomy book, and now it's just sitting there mocking me until I crack it open, and I was like, how can I get out of this trap I've set myself? But I gotta do it, I think.
What motivated you to buy that?
So from my understanding, there's a misconception in instructional design practices that the taxonomy is meant as a hierarchy where you are moving towards increasingly more valuable methods of interacting with content. And from my understanding, that isn't actually what it's set up to do. There is no more valuable way. It's just depending on what your goals are, and this is how you describe them. So I wanted to check that. So that's why I bought the book.
That's really smart. I hadn't really thought about it as anything other than a hierarchy. So, that's cool.
Yeah. So I mean, this is me seeing if I'm wrong, basically. Anybody else?
There's a show that I really want to start watching, and I want to know if anybody else has watched it. It's on Netflix, and how I found out about it was actually a YouTuber that I watched did like a video essay on it, and it's called was it Crime Scene Kitchen or something? And like you would think based on the name of the show that it would get like really into like true crime and maybe go off the deep end there. But no, actually what it is it's a delightful show where people try to recreate desserts from like a messy kitchen essentially. Okay. And apparently there's like a few like teams of 2, and Joel McHale out of all people is the host. And it's a delightful cooking show if anybody is interested. So I've been really trying to like branch out as far as shows go, because I feel like as somebody who was really into film and like made it their thing, I have not watched a lot of films lately and I feel really bad.
It sounds interesting. I haven't I do like cooking shows, and my wife likes crime shows, so maybe we can meld those two together.
There was one episode or like one part, I guess, where there's like, for whatever reason, there's just like an Italian team where like that's their thing, is they're Italian, and they didn't get that they had to make a cannoli. And as an Italian, no. I am very offended at them. And so just kind of brought that part out.
All right. If there isn't anything else, I think we'll move on. We all good? Thumbs up? Okay. Awesome. You're great. You're all doing great. Here we go. All right. So that's going to end this segment. We're going to move into our next segment, the one that probably people are actually interested in. We're going to move into the arcade, and we're going to talk about our experience with the Castlevania franchise. Okay, so we have some people who've played these games extensively. So let's start with our guests. Ali, how have you experienced Castlevania? How is it seeped into your being?
It mostly started when growing up, I was a huge fan of Metroid, and like when any sort of like research with Metroid like kind of goes along, you find out that there's like a term for games called Metroidvania. So growing up, I was only like Nintendo. I didn't have a lot of, PlayStation, which is mostly where the later Castlevanias were on. So I started branching out to see what the Vania side of Metroidvania was. But there aren't many of those on Nintendo systems that I own. So when I was like in middle school, I used to like emulate old games a lot just because someone gave me a flash drive with it, with the old, like basically the NES library, and I'm like, this is cool. So I played the first 3 Castlevanias. That was the first time I ever got into it. And then when the Wii Virtual Console came out, they had a Japanese only Castlevania game on there called Rondo of Blood that I loved. And I never finished it. Those games are really hard, but I would just keep trying to get as far as I could in them. And then later on, I played the game that's the successor to Rondo of Blood, Symphony of the Night, only a couple years ago when I got a PlayStation, and they re-released it on there. And that's the only one I've actually beaten, because that one is like a Metroidvania style rather than a hard, action platformer game. And that's one of my favorite games of all time now. It's just really phenomenally done. But yeah, that's my experience with the Castlevania games.
Ron would be very happy to know that Symphony of the Night was your favorite game, because that is also Ron's favorite game.
Good taste, Ron.
Didn't Ron say he's like bought it like 10 times or something like that?
On every single console that has ever been released. Yeah.
That's dedication.
Vanessa, what about you?
Well, it was one of the first games I ever played. Aside from like kid games. So when I was 4, I got into playing Castlevania 2, which was Simon's Quest. And I basically got into video games to spend time with my brother. He didn't want to hang out with me. And so I'd either have to watch him play or try to learn how to play. So I got really into Castlevania because I loved the music. Like, oh, this is really, I think that Castlevania 2 has one of the best soundtracks for an NES game, or just a game period. It's really good. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's a pretty not common opinion, but I really loved it.
No, take your stance. Castlevania 2 best soundtrack.
It's super good. So it was the first video game I ever beat, but how do I put it? I actually found my brother's book of like cheat codes for NES games. So I learned about like how to put like different symbols into the game to get to certain stages, or like already completed certain things. So when I say, I beat that game, it's kind of a loose description. But it was really accessible for me as being, 4 to 5-ish years old. And I really loved it. I had no clue about vampires or violence or anything like that. I just really enjoyed playing. So from there, I tried playing 3, which was a little bit more difficult for me. 1 was just no go. I played it, but like not in any sort of serious fashion. But I really enjoyed whenever I would. So.
So like my understanding of Castlevania is it's this very expansive series. So it kind of stretches over hundreds of years, has this entire familial lineage. And then at a certain point, also like the character, I'm always fascinated when like game designers decide to like make changes in the lore of their game, where they're like, and then at a certain point, this whole family that we've established as our main characters hands it off to just some random dudes for some reason. and so like I guess there's this whole other characters that go in. Did you have like a specific connection to either of you to any of the characters that are in there, or was it more the gameplay?
I liked, as far as like the storylines to follow, I really like the storyline of Richter Belmont, which is covered in the games Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night. That as far as like characters in like a cast, I guess, that like I associated with, they were the ones I liked the most. I liked the depiction of Dracula in those games. I liked the relationship between like Richter and Alucard in like those games. And aside from that, like I like the actually I guess I'm not sure if they're older. Castlevania timeline's weird with when each game takes place, but I like the Trevor cast of people. The show really does a good job of like really fleshing them out, because I believe they're only from an NES game and then one other game. And Simon's cool, but I only really played Castlevania 1 of those games. Castlevania 2 was always too hard for me.
Mm-hmm. Is Castlevania 2 the one that's impossible? Like, unless you designed the game, like where the stuff is located, you would basically have to just randomly hit things at various points.
Vanessa beat it. She just had all those nifty tricks.
Here we go.
So nobody else has beaten it except for the developers and then Vanessa.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about it. I was like, oh, I like these pictures. I'll put the pictures in the screen and then I'll have fun. And I'm like, oh, Dracula's really easy.
I will say, like, I think modern games have the language of video games, I think, is like kind of changed. So how they tell you how to play it and like how to relate to it. Because I tried to play these older ones. I bought them on like the Switch store or the Nintendo store, and I was trying to play like Castlevania 1, Castlevania 2, and I was just like finding it impossible. Just like there was, as far as I could tell, there's no way to get more health, and like my style of playing is so like, I don't even want to say aggressive, but like not cautious, that because I'm used to being able to like get your health back, that like I was dying constantly. And the fact that you collect hearts, but the hearts don't increase your health, like even that was making it a challenge for me.
Yeah, they're very obtuse games. Like there is a way to heal in the early Castlevania games, but you wouldn't know it unless you literally whipped every single block of the level, because random ones are breakable and they contain people, like the speedrunning community calls it just like wall chicken, because they look like they're just fried chickens in the wall, and that's the only way to heal you. And they are hidden. You can't, like, if you're going through normally, like I presume you did, you will never like naturally find them. The only way to heal is to die, really.
Oh, oof.
I was very fortunate. We had a subscription to Nintendo Power, and I think they had like a printout of the map of where all that stuff was.
There you go.
But
Very
even
useful.
with that, it was really difficult. And I don't know. After about like the clock level in the third one, I would kind of get bored and give up. I died a lot there.
You see the war flashbacks happening. You're like, yeah, a lot of lives lost.
Do you like just sitting around the table? Do you remember the clock level? Like, I was there. I also think it's interesting the way. So like the older kind of design of games kind of reminds me of like old school D&D, in that like you have a bunch of monsters and you just kind of put them wherever, and then people are just going through a place and like all of a sudden there's some monster there. Why is the monster there? Who knows? Who cares? It's just there. Now you have to fight it. And it's it always seems strange to me, like these random like creatures, and it's just like in the room, like it's sort of excusable in the video game. You're like, this is electronic, whatever. But like when you're playing an RPG, like that's supposed to be a real world where people live, and presumably there's a whole ecosystem that exists. And just the fact is like, well, like minotaurs are always in caves guarding treasure. That's their natural habitat. And it just always struck me as kind of false. And like, well, watching that experience kind of in a electronic format with a little bit of hindsight also now seems really strange. Like, why are there 12 wolves in a row in this castle? And why is the only way to kill them by whipping them in the face? It's weird.
What kind of biome do you think Dracula's castle is in?
See? These are the questions that need answers.
Truly.
I assume it would be something similar to well, it takes place in like Eastern Europe, right? Like that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So are you saying that vampires are plains creatures? Are they this like?
Well, if American
a
Werewolf in
wetland?
London has taught me anything, yes.
Okay. Much like the jackrabbit, the vampire inhabits the plains of Eastern Europe. Good to know. All right. Does anybody have anything else they wanna share before we move on? Alrighty. Okay, everybody. So let's get into the section that we're all prepared for and interested in, the thing we watched an entire season of television for, and talk about Castlevania Season 1 in our feature presentation. Okay. So I watched this all in like a block, and this is probably the third time I've watched it, because the other two times I wasn't really paying attention. So just off the bat, I'll start by saying I'm really impressed with this adaptation, because it seems like they've really taken kind of the core thing that people enjoy about this and like made it seem like a real place that people could actually live instead of like crazy nonsense. So what's all your impressions?
As far as like the environment, or like just anything?
I guess just the series as a whole. Like, what was your experience with it?
I definitely feel like, especially video game adaptations, benefit from the medium of animation because you can do anything and you can kind of have a little bit more control of how these characters are, where the voice actors will give them some type of personality. But as far as the environments and the type of action that you're going for and those beats that you're trying to hit, I think animation really lends itself to adaptations, especially because video games are animated. So it's kind of like it's a one-to-one, whereas like with some of the other adaptations that we reviewed, there's definitely more of like a human element to like live adaptation, in that, you know, humans mess up all the time and there's so many clashing personalities, whereas like with animation, I feel like it's easier to get everybody on the same page. I don't know, I'm just thinking back to just every single live action thing that we discussed on this show and just stories of production and everything else. But I feel like animation really lends itself to being a better medium for video game adaptations.
I think there's certainly something where you know you're not dealing with like people on set, you know, so I think that kind of helps. I don't know, I think there is also this hesitancy to go, or at least used to go weird when you're dealing with like real objects, and so people always tried to like make the video game world seem like the real world, like with Resident Evil and the other things we've looked at, and up until probably like Detective Pikachu and like Sonic, where they're just like, no, things are nuts, it'll just be crazy and that's fine. Where they kind of embraced what people enjoy about these. Vanessa, what did you think about season 1?
I really enjoyed how Dracula was humanized in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
And really this whole backstory of him and Lisa and what happened with her, and how she, even though she was executed, still held to her values. And I think I really appreciate a solid revenge story. I love Magneto. I love Kill Bill. I love that kind of stuff because they're kind of like, they're taboo stories. And so you don't see them humanized and executed all too terribly often. It's just not very common. So seeing that side of Dracula, we get, typically in Dracula lore canon, we get like the Bram Stoker version, and that's exactly what Dracula is, and that's part of the canon. But seeing this side of his character, I think really is a great way to open the story. And that is probably my favorite part. Certainly he goes a little off the wall, as things progress, but it's just really interesting to see that aspect of it and how that loss really motivates him, that grief motivates his hate, and how he decides to basically declare war on all of humanity, and what that looks like interplayed with the church and a Belmont and the speakers and all of that. So just seeing the Dracula side was really fantastic.
Yeah, does that, I know we just finished talking about the games, but does that come through in the games, or is it just much more like one-sided? Like, is he just like evil and you got to kill him?
I think in the NES versions, it's definitely that. I can't really speak to the others, but it's much more of a very like Van Helsing / like Indiana Jones whipping style kind of story, right? So
Yeah, even in there are some games like the more dialogue heavy like PlayStation ones, like where they can get more dialogue in. They do try to humanize Dracula, but I think it's way not to the extent of this show. Like the one I said liking a lot, Rondo of Blood, that game starts out with like the same signature scene that this show does, because it shows just the burning of Lisa at the stake. And that's like the closest like to really humanizing Dracula that you really get in like a lot of the games, which it does enough, but it doesn't let you like on this show. I feel like I'm like rooting for Dracula, especially in the early episodes. Like episode 1, where you really don't see Trevor till like the end. You're like, yeah, Dracula's the protagonist of this show. Like this is his revenge.
Yeah, I do remember when I first watched the show being a little confused, like in that first episode, like I didn't think this was a show about Dracula, but I guess like, okay, that's cool. I also do appreciate that what Vanessa was talking about, where usually your antagonist isn't given a lot of sympathy and a lot of space sometimes, especially in like traditional kind of sci-fi fantasy series. There's just like this, in like Buffy they call it like the big bad or something like that, where and they are unsympathetic and just meant to interact with the protagonist and be the foil for the plot. And here, like I watched through the second season where it gets even more involved, and I was still like half on Dracula's side throughout the whole thing. Like I was just like, okay, yeah, but like I can still see his point. I mean, it's not a bad idea. I mean, it's a bad idea, but like I can see where he's coming from. Okay, I just need to go on record. Exterminating all of humanity is a bad thing. Okay, just like baseline.
Dane, cut that part out. But I think also too that's like that's a credit to the showrunners and the writers, because they did such a good job at humanizing and fleshing out each of these characters. Like even the priest, who we all hate, right? Like we all agree that he is the villain of season 1. Like he is the fucking worst. Like, yeah, Dracula has gone on and killed everybody, and we all agree that you shouldn't kill all of humanity, but fuck that priest. Where like, but even he gets his moments of like, you see his motivations kind of come through, and like you like, so it's just a credit to the writing in general for fleshing out all of these characters, even if we only get like a little bit of time with them. Like the speakers, like as a group themselves, we only get a little bit of time with them. We mostly stay with Sypha, but we still get a sense of like their history kind of through the information dumps that Sypha gives us here and there. And we don't necessarily get too much information about maybe like the Belmonts as a whole. Like if you were to go into this blind, you get like their general like story, but you don't hear really about them as a family too much until Trevor has those intimate moments where he's like talking about stuff, but also too, credit to the like the just the artists in general, because the settings tell so much that you need to know. Like I think the sets are gorgeous, and like the Belmont Castle, that library is so cool, and I want to go there so bad. And it's like all you need to know just by like these halls and the streets and seeing how the people live. Like you pick up on all of those things immediately, and it's that attention to detail that I think really makes this show as strong as it is.
And jumping off that, I like that it also has these details to let people who don't know anything about Castlevania to really see why this world is so cool, and they really flesh it out that way. And they also sprinkle in nice little references for people that have played the games. Like the Belmont library that you're describing is filled, if you look at it, with just a ton of references to items from the games, characters from the games, like even ones not just like Castlevania 3, like that the show primarily adapts, but like older games, like Nick had mentioned earlier with like the not being able to find food. Trevor actually does find food in a wall in his with the Belmont home, like as a little reference to just like the wall chicken and as the healing items from the games. Like I love touches like that to make it both this unique new take on Castlevania that also can still appease longtime fans.
I love the Easter eggs in the show. Like that, one of my favorite moments was when the speakers were asking Trevor, what does he plan to do once he moves on? He says something along the lines of eat, drink, wander, do it again. And it was just like, oh, just like the games. That's great. So
What did we think of the characters though? Because we just talked about like who really shines as a character. Because I just got done talking about how good all of them are. Now let's tear them apart. What characters do we like the most?
So I've always been a big fan of people who surprise you with their competence and who are like underestimated. So I'm a big Trevor person, I guess, through watching this, because like he starts out as a drunk basically, and we see him like, even though like he's like obviously severely intoxicated, like still do pretty good in a bar fight, but ultimately lose. So like he's still like, you can see him in this low place in his life, and then through the first season kind of start to regain even his like self-respect as he's doing what his life's goal is, or his life's mission or something, or starting to attain that. And so I've always appreciated characters like that. I like one of my favorite characters is Malcolm Reynolds from Firefly, and like his main superpower is that people underestimate him basically. And so yeah, I'd say I really appreciated what he was doing. And I like the voice acting. I can never remember anything I've seen Richard Armitage in. I've just heard his name a bunch, and I thought he did a really great job.
Now I need to know what else he was in. Let me look. Everyone else keep talking. What else did you like? I had to find out this.
As someone who's like seen the character of Alucard before from having played Symphony of the Night, that stars him, and he's in Castlevania 3 and in other games, it's really cool seeing this adaptation and where it strays from like it's obviously there's still the same core character, but they kind of personalize him in like different ways. Whereas in Symphony of the Night, since you like mainly play as him, they give him a lot more he's more outwardly heroic, whereas in here you can tell he's very conflicted about having to slay his father, and just the relationship that he has with them. Like it's so interesting to me how you first see Alucard like in Dracula's castle with him, and then the next time you see him, he's like hiding in like his crypt or whatever under Greshit. And it's just interesting that he could have been with his dad the whole time, but he chose to kind of like, take a stand against him, even though he got like severely punished by the most powerful vampire that he knows. And his voice acting performances, obviously they're all incredible, but I really like how Trevor and Alucard just talk to each other.
Also, Richard Armitage was Thorin in the new Hobbit films that came out.
Well, I didn't see those, so.
Okay, well, I'll tell you later what else he was in.
That's great.
I really enjoy Trevor as a character. I feel like they set him up to kind of emulate in a way, and I don't know, you can check me on this if it's incorrect, but he reminds me a lot of Spike from Cowboy Bebop and how they presented him, and he has that kind of like swagger of that Spike sort of had, maybe slightly like a hair like Vash the Stampede too. I don't know, but there's definitely like some. I kind of noticed some like harken. Or some moments where they're sort of like hearkening to those other types of shows where you have this like indifferent to cool kind of protagonist who's letting you know how much he doesn't care and how cool he is, but is also really good at what he does and finding his way.
I did notice. I think there was a similar like fighting style that Trevor used to compared to like when you're talking about Spike. Where this, since they're fairly not slight, but they're not, giant people, they're kind of always using like more momentum and people's like own weight against them and shifting their stance so that people are off balance rather than direct kind of like brute force. And I've always found that to be kind of a cool, like visually very interesting how people animate those subtle shifts, and I don't know, it just seems real hard, and I'm always impressed by animation that can like mimic body movement that precisely.
They did it really awesome, like really well with the fight scene towards at the end of the first season. And just like I'm a sucker for a good fight scene, and so like seeing everybody's strengths and like seeing that the Morningstar whip in action was so fun.
I can only imagine how hard the whip animation must be, because you have to think, because the whole thing with the whip is that it carries like you said, carries this momentum everywhere, and it's long, so that's why it has the power. So I could only imagine just how how difficult it must have been for the animators to animate the whip and have to draw so much of it because it has to like arc around everything. It's just but for another standout animation thing, I love how they make Alucard move, in particularly his fight with Trevor at the end of season 1, because I love how his gimmick in movement is that he's often not moving per se. He's just kind of like floating really fast at something, or he's rotating around things. And the way they shoot their like camera and stuff that they use in animating these scenes is like really pulls off the effects so well that like he can fight like a human, but he can also fight like a vampire. And that's still, even with the whole show perspective, that's still my favorite fight scene because of how much they emphasize Alucard's like very unique way of moving.
In thinking about it, I'm not bothered by it, but there's still that kind of like random monster stuff that's kind of a holdover. So like when he fights like the Cyclops, they're like, well, the Cyclops lives off of, was it like your fear or your hope or something like that, and like turns you to stone? And it's just like, is that gonna last that long? Like, it seems like he'd get real hungry. I don't think people have been down there that often. What's he living on? So that's my pedantic take, I guess, for this particular episode.
That was definitely irritating. I had the same thought. He's this giant monster, and like, what's down there? There's just...
Is he just are rats scared of him? Is he like turning those to stone? Is there like millions of rats that were just off camera that we don't see?
Maybe it's like snake rules where like they could eat one thing and like it digests it in like a week or something, and then like you only have to have it every so often.
Okay. But snakes don't like keep eating when they're not hungry, you know, like, so why is he bothering anymore? What's he protecting? It doesn't, it's just every answer just makes more questions. And I think we should spend the next hour just talking about this. So buckle in, everybody. We're going to go deep.
The most important character, the Cyclops.
Random Cyclops that dies after 4 minutes. He was my real favorite character, I think. It's not the vampires you kill, it's the Cyclops you meet along the way. Okay, any other final thoughts that anybody has for season 1 of Castlevania?
We didn't talk about Sypha, but I do really like her. I feel like, I'm not sure if it's actually true, but the vibe I get from watching this is it feels like some alum from Avatar: The Last Airbender worked on specifically like Sypha, because I find a lot of the way, especially when she's working with fire and lightning, like they seem like very similar to how they pulled off the fire and lightning effects from Avatar. I forget if those are really shown off a lot in this season. I know fire definitely is, but I really like all the attention that they had with Sypha and just her character and how she gets along with the group in general. Her romance with Trevor is very cute as well.
Sypha gives me really big Blossom from the Powerpuff Girls vibes.
Yeah.
Because she's that know-it-all and I trust her. Like, she knows what she's talking about because she says it very confidently. And she is kind of the one that's like directing the story at times. Like, she's definitely the catalyst for later seasons, like just getting Trevor to places that he needs to be. And you know, she's good at what she does and she knows it. So you can't fault her for that.
Yeah.
I think this was the second season, because I watched these kind of all in a row, so they're all bleeding together. So apologies. But there's a part where they're in like the Belmont Library and she's looking after all these like hundreds of thousands of books with all this knowledge, and she's just talking. It's just like, it really made me realize that the speakers, we should have written stuff down. Like, there's just so much stuff that we definitely should have been writing things down this whole time.
Okay, that makes me think of that moment where Trevor is telling Sypha to just leave that area with the Cyclops, and she's like, well, there must be something down there. He's like, no, my family wrote stuff down, there's nothing down there. So that there's like differences in the storytelling. It almost puts a question in my head if maybe oral tradition in this particular group could get muddied, or maybe what they know or what they think they know isn't always necessarily true. Not that Belmont history would necessarily be either, but it was interesting to see that difference between the two of them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that like I was thinking about, where there's a moment at the end where like, she's going down there because there's this legend that there's this, protector of the city, and then she thinks she's vindicated because she finds somebody who's like this great fighter, and he's just like, no, I've only been here a year. Like, there isn't like that, it's not that. So like the idea that there are conflicting stories, I think you could make a case is a central theme to this, whole series, where maybe that's part of the reason why we see such where we start with Dracula and we move to the other characters. The central to Trevor's story is the misconception that people have about his family. Like, you're dealing in, dark magic, and that's why there's monsters all around you. And he's like, no, there's monsters all around us because we hunt them and kill them. Like, that's our, perception of our life, and it conflicts with everybody else's story about us.
And also the whole series and games started with a misconception where Lisa was just, treating people with medicine and science, and she's accused of witchcraft. And that was the catalyst for this entire thing. So there's all these miscommunications, and like, you never know who's actually telling the truth. So like, spoilers for season 3, but there's a character in season 3, and I'm forgetting his name. He's the magician person who's like trying to find a portal.
Oh,
he's
Saint
like,
Germain.
yeah, and he's not honest until like he needs to be, or else, you know, people will die, or things or his plan will not go according to plan. And it's this hiding of information and, you know, giving people false information. That's really like kind of one of the core elements of the conflict and drama in this show.
You can see this, like, the conflict between different types of power. So you have like it's Lisa, right? I always want to give it some weird fantasy like twist. But it's just Lisa.
Maybe it's Lisa. We don't know how it's spelled.
Yeah, there we go. It's Lisa with 3 Y's. But this may not happen till the second season either. But basically, like, you find out that like she's basically ratted out to like the church by like the person who used to be kind of the wise woman in the village, because she was like kind of taking her place because her medicine actually worked. And so like she was like accused of witchcraft basically by this person, so that because her power was threatened, and then the church's power is threatened by kind of the Belmont family, because they're actually fighting the, you know, things that are attacking the common people, and the church actually isn't able to do anything. And then the church is then subsumed by Dracula, and he's trying to. So there's all these like stacks of power that are interacting with each other, and come into conflict through like unnecessarily, like just because your position is threatened. And so you have to destroy the thing that's threatening the position, even if it's actually in some ways helping the broader world. So anyway, capitalism. It's horrible. No, we don't need to go into that. All right, everybody.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole.
You know my stance. We'll just make this and do well, you talked about it last episode, you know, unions. We'll start to unionize.
It is strange how much every podcast I do just turns into something about worker rights, and how we're all being exploited by more powerful entities.
The vampires of society.
And let's start naming names. Let's get everybody fired. Here we go. No, we're not doing that. All right. Last call. Does anybody have any parting thoughts they'd like to leave us all with before we end the show, not die?
I get a wild chicken and come back. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
There it is.
Speaking of wall chickens, what would everybody rate this season of Castlevania out of wall chickens?
Thank you for doing my job, because I forgot that's part of the show.
Is this usually a 5-point scale, or
It's a 10-point scale.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna give it 8. I think that's only because I know it gets better, and the first season is relatively short.
I agree with 8. Yeah, for the same reasons. It's kind of weird that they only did 4 episodes for this one as like a whole season of television, but they're good 4 episodes, so I guess all the fat's trimmed from the chicken.
These are a good 4 episodes in the same way that Infinite Darkness are a bad 4 episodes.
4 episodes that should have just been a 2-hour movie. I'm gonna give it an 8 too, for kind of the same reasons, but also I remember when I first watched this, I actually thought a little bit of the humor was really immature, and so like it got more eye rolls than like chuckles out of me. And so some of the jokes didn't quite land, whereas the later seasons are usually pretty good. I have my thoughts on 3, but we're talking about season 1. So I'm going to do an 8 out of 10 as well, because there's room for improvement. And we know that because they improved the next season.
I want to give it a 10. 10 wild chickens out of 10.
Yeah, go for it.
But I think it's kind of a 9 because of the jokes. But the reason I'm going a little bit higher is because even though it's only 4 episodes, I really appreciate the pace of the storytelling. It's perfect for my attention span. And I just really enjoyed how concise it was. It didn't get too meandery or anything like that. It didn't feel like there was any filler, and I always appreciate when something is just really on point and everything is relevant to the story, and there's no like meandering side episodes. Like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, I always skip the painted lady because I'm just like, this adds nothing to my experience. So there isn't anything like that with this, at least in season 1. So
all right, everybody, that's going to wrap up another episode of Pixel Theater. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we've enjoyed talking about it. Maybe even more. Who knows? If you like the podcast, you can find us on most of, if not all, of the regular old podcast applications. You can follow us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. We are everywhere. We are all pervasive. We are, not in a friendly way, not like a weird, like we're watching you, but like more like a, hey, how's it going, neighbor? Give us a call. That'll wrap up this episode. I've been Nick Noel. For everybody else, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Is there anything that either of our guests would like to plug before we go?
That's such a good point. Thank you, producer Aaron.
Vanessa, what are you up to? Anything you want to plug? Your Twitter?
My Twitter's pretty dull, but I could plug it. You can find me on Twitter at Vanessa L. Haddad. And I'm not too terribly active, but when I am, I try to make it meaningful. So,
Ollie, anything you would like to plug? Any social media?
I'm similarly not very active on social media, so I'll say watch the show. It's good. Give them the free plug on the show that's already a plug.
the rare double plug for the thing that we talked about. That's awesome. Okay, Aaron, is there anything you want to plug? You so rarely get to speak on this.
Everybody watch Pixel Theater. That's what I'm going to plug. I'm going to plug us. Doing it again, second time.
There we go. That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. Like I said, that'll wrap up this show. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Okay. Here we go. Whew. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Ready. For a second, I forgot the name of the show, just so people know.
We're off to a great start, and now Dane can for sure know that you forgot the name of the show.